let me first ask, because I'm sure labor is your biggest concern as well, how many jobs you're going to have left, how many employees you're going to have left, and what you'll do if flying comes back after this crisis.
Good morning, Matt. Good morning to your viewers. We currently employ about 18,000 people. So today we're announcing cuts of about, just over 15%. We're going to have to lose, regrettably, about 3,000, mainly pilots and cabin crew over the next 3 or 4 months. And that's because this year we're now carrying less than 100 million passengers against an original budget of 154 million passengers. We'll be down about a third in traffic. We have almost no traffic in the June quarter. It looks like we'll lose about 100 million in the June quarter. We have never in the history of Ryanair lost money in that quarter before. And so, the situation is grim. We expect to be allowed by the European governments to go back to some limited flying in July, from July onwards. July, we expect to operate about 40% of our normal program. August, maybe 60% of our normal program. And then we're moving into the winter schedule. So I think what we're facing now is a historic decline in air traffic in Europe for the next 12, 18 months. And now I do expect that when we do fly in July, I think the traffic will be strong, but it'll be strong because the airlines, the tourist facilities, the hotels in Spain, Portugal, Italy will be discounting hugely to get people to move during what remains of the tourist season before the schools go back in September. So we think it's inevitable now. Our business is going to be about a third smaller this year. We're going to take out about 15% of our staff with deep regret, but there's nothing else we can do. And even the remaining staff, we're going to be looking for pay cuts of about 20%. And that is because the environment now in Europe has completely changed for airlines. The strong airlines going into the COVID crisis, the Ryanair, BA, the EasyJet, and others, who had strong balance sheets, low-cost operation, would have expected to emerge even stronger. I now think we're going to emerge from this weaker because the people who went into it weakest, which is the legacy airlines Air France, Lufthansa, Alitalia, have either been nationalised or are receiving extraordinary volumes. I mean, Lufthansa Group is applying for about 12 billion euros in state aid. Air France, KLM, 10 billion euros in state aid, on top of payroll support schemes. These are going to hugely distort the level playing field for aviation in Europe and airline competition in Europe for the next, I think, 3 to 5 years. We will now be competing with legacy airlines who before couldn't make money, but now have so much state aid that they can afford to lose money for the next 3 to 5 years and will do significant damage to airlines like Ryanair, EasyJet and others, the well-run airlines. So the airlines that went into this the strongest, I think, will now emerge the weakest unless we take this kind of radical action that we've announced this morning.
Michael, do you have a strategy in place to challenge that state aid? I mean, other than, coming on Bloomberg and speaking to investors who are going to largely be free market capitalists that agree with you anyway, you're kind of preaching to the choir. How do you challenge this at the state and EU level?
Well, we've already, Matt, submitted the complaints to the European Commission. We have to file our cases with the, I think it's the ECJ or the ECJ within 2 months. We'll have it done before the end of May. But the problem is going to be it may take 6-12 months to get these state aid cases, which are clearly in breach of not just state aid, but also competition rules. It'll take 12-18 months to get these overturned. And then what happens? Does anybody seriously think that the German government is going to allow Lufthansa to go bust or that the French government is going to allow Air France to go bust? We don't. It's never yet happened in history. So I think what we simply have to do is to cut our cloth. We have to take the very painful decisions that the free markets impose on us in this crisis. We will survive, but we will survive as an airline with a lower cost base, but with much lower pricing for the next, I think, 3 to 5 years. We will be a stronger airline at the end of this, but only by taking this kind of radical but deeply painful surgery that we've announced this morning.
There's only a few household names in airlines. I'd put you up there, Branson as well, and Willie Walsh. Now, Willie Walsh is going to take state aid from Spain. Does that make sense to you? I know that you know each other. Does that seem fair?
I mean, I don't think it's necessarily fair. I mean, to be fair to Willie Walsh, I think BA has already said it's not going to seek state aid, nor will it. I think Iberia might be in a slightly different situation in Spain, and certainly their subsidiary here in Ireland, Aer Lingus, won't get state aid in Ireland. The Irish government couldn't afford it. I'm not. To be fair, I think BA announced 12,000 job cuts earlier this week. They're doing everything they can to survive without state aid. It's the Lufthansas, the Air Frances, the KLMs, the state aid addicts, the junkies. Alitalia has been nationalised again. I mean, who knows when Alitalia... I mean, Alitalia's never made money in its entire history. We're the largest airline in Italy, but now we have to compete with an Alitalia that has the might of the Italian state behind it. So we're going to have a distorted market for competition for the next few years. And that means we will have to have fewer pilots and cabin crew. The remaining pilots and cabin crew will be paid less. We're reviewing all of our, we will be closing bases, certainly in some of the tourism economies like Spain, Italy, and elsewhere, where frankly it could take a year or 2 years for that traffic to return. And we're also relooking at our fleet orders. We're in discussions with the Lauda Airbus lessors. We're in discussions with Boeing about our aircraft orders there, because we need to right-size the company for what is going to be, I think, 3 to 5 years of very grim trading here in Ryanair.
How many jets do you expect to defer from Boeing? I think you expected, or you're planning on 30 in 2020. You're going to revise that downwards, I assume. What's the picture look like there? Can you quantify it?
Well, I mean, we have at the moment, Matt, we've got 150 firm aircraft on order for delivery over the next 5 years. Now, they've been held up by the MAX delivery delays. We've got another 60 options on top of that. We would still like to take some, if not all, of those aircraft. I think what we would be more focused on doing is maybe grounding some of our older NGs. I mean, these new aircraft, the MAX aircraft, they arrive with 16% lower fuel, 4% more seats. They will help us to be more efficient in the future. But, who knows when the MAX is going to return. We're pleased to see Boeing raise significant funds last night, which eliminates any future risk to Boeing. But our focus in the short term is not aircraft. Our focus in the short term is reducing our already industry lowest costs in Europe so that we can compete for the next 4 or 5 years against these legacy airlines who've been, received multi-billions of state aid to help them below cost sell against Ryanair and other efficient airlines for the next number of years. This is good news, by the way, for customers and consumers. It does vindicate my view that air travel will return strongly through the end of 2020 and into 2021. But it's going to return strongly on the back of lower pricing from airlines and certainly from tourism operators across Europe, as long as we can have a vaccine or can see off the COVID-19 pandemic. But 3 weeks ago, I thought we would emerge out of this with fewer airlines, with a smaller number of bigger players in Europe. Now we're going to emerge out of this with a whole load of airlines receiving massive state subsidies to allow them to below cost sell and compete unfairly against us for the next number of years.
Michael, how do you expect to get people back in your planes, back flying? I mean, at 6'4", I'm very happy that the thinner seats you have in your planes allow me to actually have enough leg room, but I don't necessarily want to sit directly next to another person. And you've said you're not willing to leave the middle seat free.
That's true, Matt, for simple reason that the middle seat free provides no social distancing whatsoever. You're only 2.5 feet away from between the window and the aisle seat. The person behind you in the aisle seat and in front of you in the aisle seat is even less than 2.5 feet away. You can't have social distancing on board an aircraft in the same way you can't manage it in a train or a London Underground. And I think we will need different measures for sensible measures, which would be temperature checks at the airports. Anybody who has a temperature higher than 38 degrees would be refused entry. All passengers on board and our staff, the cabin crew, will be wearing face coverings, face masks, etc. Aircraft being disinfected daily each night. That would provide enormous, I think, barriers to the spread of COVID-19. But we're also going to have some common sense measures. You can't run the London Underground or train services or planes with social distancing measures. I mean, there's no social distancing in an airport terminal. It's simply not possible. You can't board an aircraft or deplane an aircraft with social distancing. So I think masks, temperature checks, and disinfectant are the way forward. That's how the Asian airlines have already returned to flight services over there. And you remember the Chinese airlines are now running at about 70% of their pre-COVID schedule. So it will bounce back. And I think traffic numbers will bounce back because the airlines will engage in very aggressive discounting, led by Lufthansa, Air France, with the benefit of 30 billion of state aid. We'll be discounting aggressively. So there will be lots of price incentives for passengers. And I think, but we will all be taking sensible precautions like temperature checks and face masks to ensure that what are, after all, short-haul flights, I mean, our average flight duration is 1 hour and 15 minutes. There will not be a spread of COVID-19 on board any short-haul flights if these sensible measures are taken.
How much of a tailwind, Michael, is the drop in oil that we're all watching with such amazement? How much of that can you translate into a tailwind for Ryanair?
I mean, the bizarre situation, Matt, at the moment is it's like a poison pill because most of Europe's airlines were already well hedged for the next 12 months. I mean, we were hedged out to March of 2021 at $61 a barrel, which was less than the $72 a barrel we paid last year. We thought we were in great shape. Now we're having to provide for hedge ineffectiveness because spot prices have fallen to, $24, $25 a barrel. So for the remainder of this year, that's probably going to cost us 300 or 400 million euros, even if we, based on our existing flight program for the next 12 months. Now, clearly, when we get into 2021, 2022, it will clearly be a huge headwind for those airlines that survive. But again, our concern today is that, while we'll benefit from lower oil prices, we'll benefit probably from some airport return to service incentives. We will all be competing with one hand tied behind our back in Europe because Lufthansa will have 12 billion of state aid, Air France will have 10 billion of state aid. They'll be able to dump pricing for the next 3 to 5 years. And if not eliminate us entirely, certainly make our lives very difficult for the next couple of years because the EU is not protecting the level playing field. It's not protecting free and fair competition. It's allowing national governments to dope up their failed legacy airlines.